Welcome to our third series of Amplify Voices of the Global Majority, focusing on the roots of yoga. My name is Kaveri Dada Barros, and I will be your host along with my colleague, Miles Newton, for our journey together throughout this week. And tonight, as the second presenter of our 9-session series, we welcome Hawah Kasat, sharing a talk called When Ganesh is the Obstacle, How Adversity Can Propel Your Life Forward. Once again, Kripalu has joined forces with changemakers around the globe who work to dismantle inequity, mitigate harm, steward the planet, prioritize collective wellness, and stress interdependent liberation. Throughout history, voices of global majority, Black, Indigenous, people of color, have been at the forefront of breaking down barriers of systemic issues that affect both the planet and humanity while ushering in radical change. Whether that has been through bringing yoga to the West or fighting injustice in the front lines of society. We're excited to be here with you to explore the heart and soul of the ancient practice of yoga with an incredible and thoughtful panel of South Asian yoga teachers, practitioners, wisdom keepers, and lineage holders. Now is a time that requires us to listen, heal historical wounds, and to do something different. We enter this work as an act of community care because none of us can be well unless we are all well. So again, welcome. We're inspired to be sharing this space with you. We are honored to gather today virtually, located in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts, on the original homelands of Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans. And on behalf of Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, we invite you to use the link in the chat to learn about what land you are on and its Indigenous inhabitants. Please take a moment to share with us the land you are calling in from by typing that into the chat. Today, Kripalu works in reverence with these lands as a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to empowering people and communities to realize their full potential through the transformative wisdom and practice of yoga. Our Amplify Voices series has been made possible because of the generous gifts of our donors. We thank them and we thank you all for your presence with us this evening. And as a part of this collective space we share tonight, we would like to center our online community agreements. So we are posting them in the chat for everyone. Please take a moment to read them over and know that by being here in this space, you are acknowledging and opting into them. And we thank you for that. Let us take a moment to settle in a bit more together, and let's take 3 conscious breaths collectively. By inhaling through your nose and gently exhaling through your mouth. You can close your eyes or lower your gaze while doing this. Let's begin. Thank you all. With deep appreciation and reverence, we welcome Hawah Kasat as your guide for the evening. Hawah is a celebrated global humanitarian, author, educator, nonprofit leader, TEDx speaker, yogi, and a world leader in the peacekeeping and conflict resolution. He has dedicated his life to teaching about solutions to violence and ways to peace, with those interested in creating a caring, sustainable, and equitable world. Hawah has been studying movement, meditation, and philosophy since childhood. With a lineage that traces back to India, Hawah's life was split between schooling in New Jersey and Washington, D.C., while spending long summers in Mumbai. From birth, Hawah has been exposed to the living traditions, culture, philosophy, and practices of his ancestral homeland. For nearly 20 years, he has been teaching yoga, mindfulness, social and emotional literacy, conflict transformation, the healing arts, and trauma-informed care to all types of students. During this presentation, Miles and I are here to support your needs. Our info is in the chat. Please feel free to direct message us if you need anything. Towards the end of the session, there may be an opportunity to have some questions that have been gathered using the Q&A feature located in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom or on the top of your screen if you're on your phone. Please use this feature rather than typing questions into the chat. Now, without further ado, we present Hawah Kasat, everyone. Thank you, Hawah. Namaste. So nice to be here with you.
Wow, thank you, Mary, for the warm introduction and welcome, and for the time you took to pay homage to the land that we're on. Thank you, Kripalu, for your work in creating this space for so many of us that are of the South Asian diaspora and have lineage and history connected to the land where yoga was first codified and given form. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to be with all of you who've been zooming in, it seems like, from all over the country and even parts of the world: Canada, Pennsylvania, New York, Tennessee, Vermont, New Jersey, Massachusetts. It's lovely to see how far and wide the interest goes, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I'd like to take a second to thank, of course, my family, my parents, who are going to come up through my talk today, and then my family in India as well, who have been so influential in my life. I hope my talk does justice and paints a real picture for all of us on life as all these perspectives collide. My talk today for all of you is called "When Ganesh is the Obstacle." And I understand that Ganesh is often considered the remover of obstacles. And for those of you that are familiar with the Hindu pantheon and the Hindu gods and goddesses, Ganesh is typically the one that we come to first in our offerings, in our prayers. And often we come to Ganesh to remove the obstacles in our life. And through my journey today with you and through my talk, I'm going to hopefully give you some insight into how Ganesh actually became an obstacle for me in my life, and really being able to realize my lineage and my historical birthright. And so I'm really excited to talk about that through this work. We'll be doing a lot of storytelling, so grab your coffee, get a cup of tea, feel free to sit back and enjoy the photos and the stories and the way you can connect deeper to this ancient practice. Here we go. When Ganesh is the obstacle. And for those who are unfamiliar with Ganesh and his form, it's right there on the right. And Ganesh is the deity with the iconic elephant head. And it's Ganesh who will be the inspiration for this talk today. But the talk actually begins for me way back with my parents. And my mom and dad are centered here in the middle in this photo. My parents were married in 1970. And my mom is right there, kind of shorter. My dad is in black and white, wearing the black suit in the middle. And those are his brothers and his cousin brothers, all to his left, to your right, and then more family to my mom's left. That photo was from 1970. My dad came to the United States from India in 1962 for the first time. He came on a boat to Mumbai, or from Mumbai to London, and then he flew to Florida as a student on a student visa. He had no more than $50 in his pocket, and he came here as a teaching assistant position at a university in Florida, and he was on a full scholarship. That's where my journey began and my sister's journey began, because we were not born in India, but both of us were born here in the United States in a little town in New Jersey, central New Jersey. This is my mom on the left. This is me, I think, when I'm like 1 or 2 years old, celebrating probably my first birthday. And this is my mom and me. I figured this would be a nice little a little oxytocin moment for all of us. Some cheeky, squishy cheeks, you know. That's my mom on the left. This is our yard in New Jersey. And my life was interesting because before I believe I could even walk, and my mom is actually on this Zoom call right now, but she could probably confirm better than me. But I believe actually before I could walk, I was actually on a plane to India. I set foot in India without being able to walk because it was really my parents' desire to see me traveling to India often as a child. And my sister and I would go back every few years, oftentimes during the summer months in between schooling. And Mumbai very much was a place that was a fascination of the senses. It was rickshaws and incense and lots of oily deep fried foods. There was prasad and red tikis and mandirs. The time in Mumbai for me was filled with incredible cousins, 10 brothers and sisters on my mom's side. My dad is one of 6 brothers. All of them have got cousins. We had cousins upon cousins in India, and I would travel back and forth often visiting these cousins. But I did all my schooling here in New Jersey, did all my public schooling in the States. But those trips to India, they created perspective for me in my world. They created an opportunity for me to really see that the world was not just East or West, but the world was East and West, and that the Eastern worlds and the Western worlds, they had a unique place where they came together. And I was in a unique position being born in the United States, but having family in India. I was in India and often would be in spaces with my grandparents that had no consistent running water, very inconsistent electricity. We were often very far away from the material wealth and privilege of what we experienced in the United States. And it was that journey which provided me with a lot of insight into how lucky I was, how fortunate I was. This right here is my grandmother on the far left. That's my mom again. That's me as a small, I don't know how old I am, but I would think I'm like 8 or 9 years old there in the middle. In India, we're in India together, and this is us just the same moment. A little bit later, my mom is holding my hands as I'm going through a puja in our little prayer circle. And probably right in front of me were some of these deities that I'm about to show you. And that's my sister on the left. I can never tell much about my story without mentioning my sister Madhuri. This is us in Diwali in India at some point in Mumbai. And those prayers and those ceremonies were often ones that grounded us in this really deep awareness of the mystical, the existential, the beyond form. I was in deep spaces of mantra and conversations around philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita when I was really young, and it was coming back to the US that often created a very jarring experience, because while in India, where food was very much sacred to the point where little food was ever wasted, in the US, I would come home, and at home in the US, there was so much waste and so much food that I would see thrown out in the cafeteria, so much like plates with half filled, half eaten food, chicken nuggets, pizzas, just all this stuff being thrown in the trash. And then I would go back to India and I would see like how much every little grain of rice was really savored and respected and honored. And it was that kind of clash of cultures which formed my childhood. It formed my perspective of the world, and it gave me the momentum and the curiosity in my life to keep working on understanding why and how these worlds are so different. As we would often be praying, and as often there was mandirs we would visit, this image is one of Ganesh, and this is a wall. And in the bedroom that I slept in the bedroom that I grew up in until I was about in sixth grade, I was actually sleeping in my mom's puja room. So like my bedroom was my mom's prayer room. And I had a small twin size bed in this little bedroom, and my mom had her deities or our deities, the deities up on the wall, and they were pictured, they're in these frames. And at the entrance to my door was Ganesh. And Ganesh was placed at the entrance to my door, and then above my head was Hanuman, the the god who many of you who are listening might know by seeing the god with the monkey face. And then to my left was Durga Ma. And so my room was filled with all these gods and goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. And at the entrance to my door was Ganesh. And this bedroom, which was my bedroom until about sixth grade, at which point I basically moved downstairs and took over a bedroom in the basement. But up until that point, Ganesh very much was front and center. Every morning I would wake up and I would see Ganesh right in front of me. And it was very interesting. It was a very interesting time in my life because this story of Ganesh was one that captivated me. I always was fascinated by the story of Ganesh. And Ganesh's origin story is really, really special. Ganesh, for those who are unaware, is probably considered the most widely revered goddess of the pantheon. And the reason is because Ganesh's parents are Parvati and Shiva, and their lives began in Mount Kailash, which was situated in the Himalayas. And Ganesh's father, Lord Shiva, also known as Mahadev, would often leave for long periods of time. And Mahadev, who is pictured here, Lord Shiva, he would leave for sometimes 10, 11, 12 years at a time. And in his absence, Parvati, his wife, and his significant other, who without Shiva would not exist, Parvati, one day in the palace was bathing in the bathhouse, and she felt like it was important that somebody was there to protect her and to make sure that nobody entered the palace while she was bathing. And since Lord Shiva was far away on one of his long journeys and in some deep meditation, Parvati decided that she was going to create Ganesh. And she created Ganesh out of sandalwood paste and turmeric. She rubbed the paste over her body, and then she removed the paste, slowly scratching it off, and mixed it with the cells of her skin. And then she molded the clay, molded the paste into a human form. And that human form is what we see here. And these are just old depictions, some old, some new, different photographs that show you sort of how Ganesh began to form through her weaving. And so after she finished molding Ganesh through her own skin, Parvati, the goddess, then pushed and imbued Ganesh in the clay form with her Shakti, and that brought Ganesh to life. And here we have the birth of Ganesh. And Ganesh here with Parvati, when first taking form here, had no elephant head. This was Ganesh pre-elephant head. And Parvati asked Ganesh to stand outside when she was bathing and make sure nobody would ever enter while she was in the bathhouse. And so one day, and at this point, Shiva was far away when Parvati gave Ganesh life. And so Shiva had no idea that Ganesh existed, no idea that Ganesh was a creation of Parvati's. And so Shiva came home from one of those 10-year escapades, and he met Ganesh. Here's another rendition of a photograph of Ganesh meeting Shiva outside of the bathhouse. And Shiva wanted to go in to see his wife Parvati, and Ganesh said, "No, sorry, you cannot pass. I was told not to let anyone enter until Parvati comes out." And Shiva became very, very enraged. He got really angry. And this is Lord Shiva. This is the first teacher of yoga. So those of you that are following yoga, you should also know that Shiva is one of our first, or the first, elucidators of the path of yoga. But Shiva got really upset and angry because he wanted to go inside of the bathhouse and see Parvati. So he said, "Who are you to tell me I can't go in?" And he said, "You can't go in without my mother's permission." And that was not okay with Shiva. He was not calculating or thinking very hard about this. He just basically decided that we're going to go. He's like, "Get out of my way, or I will move you out of my way." And Ganesh, not wanting to move and not being willing to move, began to forcefully stop Shiva from entering. And they engaged in a long battle. Ganesh was formidable, but no ultimate match for Shiva's wrath. And in the end, Lord Shiva, with his trident here, he beheads Ganesh, and Ganesh no longer has a head. And you can see here another rendition, a cartoon drawing of Parvati here on the ground, holding her hand over the body of Ganesh, who was killed by Lord Shiva. Parvati was absolutely heartbroken. She loved Ganesh. Ganesh was her child. And ultimately, now her wrath was one that was bringing out in her Durga Ma. So Parvati also incarnates into Durga Ma, also known as Kali Ma. And so Parvati began her incarnation into Durga Ma with her anger and her wrath, and she threatened to engulf and enrage and swallow the whole earth whole, unless Shiva somehow corrected this mistake of killing her son. And Shiva was very remorseful. He saw how much he hurt Parvati, and he feared Parvati. He feared her rage, and he knew that Parvati and as Kali Ma could destroy the earth and the rest of the galaxy. And so Shiva went with penance out and went with the Ganas. The Ganas were his followers, those that were often around him. He went with the Ganas out to find a way to bring Ganesh back to life. And what he knew was that he would have to bring back, before sunrise, he would need to bring back the head of another animal to put on top of the body if they were going to be able to resurrect Ganesh. And so the first animal they found in the forest was an elephant. And the Ganas took the head of the elephant and brought it back to Shiva. And Shiva put the head of the elephant onto Ganesha's body. And in that moment, Shiva and Parvati together, with both of their combined strength and Shakti, they infused Ganesha's head back onto the body and brought life back into the body, creating Ganesh. And this is a beautiful photo illustration of Parvati with the newborn son Ganesh. And Shiva, at this point, really found so much love for Ganesh and now found Ganesh to be their child. So Ganesh has now been born out of the strength and out of the love of Parvati and Shiva together. And because Shiva felt so bad for what he had done to Ganesh, Shiva said that from now on and from here forward, we will always have our offerings and our prayers be given to Ganesh first. And he asked all the other gods and goddesses to come and also offer their blessings and imbue Ganesh with this supreme intelligence and wisdom. And so Ganesh became the remover of the obstacles and became the one who is the recipient of all of our offerings and all of our blessings. Before we pray to any god or goddess, we pray to Ganesh first in the Hindu tradition. And the reason we do that is because of this beautiful story, this origin story of Ganesh. So this story was very much a part of my life and very much a part of what I was immersed in through childhood. This photo right here that you're looking at is a photo of Shiva, Parvati with Ganesh sitting in the middle of their laps together. And you can see the love here, and you can see why Ganesh was lifted to the pinnacle and the space that Ganesh has within the adoration of of millions, if not billions of people around the world. You'll find Ganesh everywhere. Normally at the entrance of temples and mandirs, you'll find Ganesh appearing in photos and images. Nowadays, you see him on t-shirts and people are getting tattoos of Ganesha's face. This is part of that origin story of what made Ganesh such an epic figure within the Hindu pantheon. And many of the attributes include good luck, good intentions, and the God of the beginnings and new beginnings, the arts and the sciences, and the holder of intellect and wisdom. This is Ganesh. And so as I sat in my bedroom every morning, I would wake up and I would see Ganesh right there at the entrance to the door. And his image was tattooed into my consciousness from a young age. And on those trips to India, I would see Ganesh in the mandirs. I would see beautiful statues made of stone that were just intricately carved with Ganesha's image. You'll find Ganesh in old temples. You're talking about a figure that's over 2,000 years old. So you will find old temples with just ancient carvings of Ganesh. And there's so many stories about Ganesha's life. I can't even get into them because there's so many beautiful, intricate stories. However, you'll notice that for sure, one thing that we know is that Ganesh holds a very special place within all of our hearts and all of our work together. So Ganesh was there in my bedroom, and every now and then, fast forwarding back to like where I am in life, I knew Ganesh was a remover of obstacles. I knew Ganesh was meant to be the remover of obstacles. Yet for me, this image of Ganesh is pretty indicative of what became a large obstacle for me to fit in with my school friends, with the people in my life that had no awareness of what it means to be South Asian or Indian or to be born into a family that is Hindu. So for me, Ganesh and Hanuman and Kalima, these were the first images that my friends in the white suburban town that I grew up in New Jersey would see when they walked into my bedroom. And for all of them, it was the first time they've ever seen anything like that. And they had no idea what it was or why these images were in my bedroom. So I would have to try to explain Ganesh. I'd have to try to explain Hanuman to my friends. And that was sometimes not so well received. I oftentimes would find myself in a space where I was being mocked, derided, made fun of because of these gods and goddesses that were so close into our lives. And so at this point, I'm being poked at. There's curious sort of that youthful meanness around the strange smells that were coming from our kitchen, the curry smells, the vegetarian household that I grew up in, the smell of ginger and coriander and garam masala, like peppering the air. And it was this piece that really made me realize how different I was than all the people in my neighborhood. And this continued on for quite some time. I remembered a time when I was in soccer practice, and this was probably around fifth or sixth grade, maybe been 10 or 11 years old. And I actually had been speaking Hindi and Marwadi, which is the language of India, and our family's from Rajasthan. So I'd spoken this language a lot when I was a kid, and I understood it very well. However, and I never really thought too much about it. It just was a part of like the way my mind worked. My parents spoke to me often in Marwadi and Hindi. When I would go to India, I would speak Hindi, Marwadi with like family members. And I'd come to the US, I would speak English. And I remember one day being at soccer practice and being surrounded by a group of friends during halftime. And we were kind of in that moment where we're eating the oranges, this kind of half sliced oranges, and we're eating oranges. And I'd kind of walked over to get some more water. And I was overhearing to the side, I was overhearing and listening to a group of friends. I guess you would call them friends because they were who I was spending a lot of my time with, they were they were making fun of a Chinese family that was in the mall, I guess, earlier that weekend. And I overheard one of the people say, "Hey, if those people can't speak English, they shouldn't be in this country." And I was just kind of honing in and I was listening and I realized and then they all started laughing and I realized that they were making fun of them speaking Mandarin in the mall, in the shopping mall. And what I realized too in that moment was about an hour later, my mom was going to come home. We're going to come to the soccer practice to pick me up. And normally, when my mom would arrive to pick me up from soccer, she would come out of the car and she'd meet me with all the other parents and adults, but she would speak to me in Hindi. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, like, I was pretty much used to being a part of a part of the laughs. Like I was kind of picked on a lot because I was Indian and I was used to like the racial slurs. I was used to all of the racism and the discrimination. But in this moment, I realized very viscerally that I could do something. I could somehow intervene. I could stop feeling like I'm constantly being outcasted and marginalized. And so what I realized was that I would have to get to my mom and like put a stop to this quickly. So about an hour later, when soccer practice is over and I see cars pulling up, I grab my things really quick and I run to the car where my mom was pulling up, and my mom gets out of the car and she starts speaking to me in Hindi, and I scream back and I kind of yell at her with anger, and I say, don't speak to me in Hindi. I don't want to hear that language. And I remember her being really confused. It was one of those childhood visceral moments where you're kind of unsure of what you're doing, but you kind of just are yelling and screaming. And I just remember screaming at my mom and being like, I don't want to hear that language. Don't ever talk to me in Hindi again. Talk to me in English. I want to speak to you in English. And from that point on, I just never really wanted to speak Hindi when I was in the United States, and I would force my parents to speak to me in English. And I spent a lot of time over the next many years feeling a lot of shame, feeling a lot of shame and pain around wanting to belong, wanting to fit in, wanting to feel like I fit in, and not knowing exactly how, because I was torn between these two worlds. And part of what's really, really important here, I think, is that when we're really young, all we want is to belong. Even probably when we're really old, all we want is to belong. We want to feel like we belong. We want to be invited in. We want to feel like we're a part of a community. And for me as a young kid, I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. And so here I was trying to fit in. And that resulted in a whole lot of other things that happened over the next many years. You'll even see here in this photo, which is really interesting, you'll see that's my mom and my dad and my sister and me, but you'll see a Christmas tree behind us. And I thought what was really interesting, I learned this a lot later, but that my parents actually, they brought Christmas into our lives, not because we were Christian, but they brought Christmas into our lives because they wanted us to feel like we fit in. They wanted us to feel like we belonged. And that just became like a part of our cultural sort of yearly ritual. We put up a Christmas tree and we celebrated Christmas and we opened presents, even though it was far away, but it was part of like the way my parents were trying to help us feel like we fit in. And then a lot later, like here's a photo of me in India. Again, I'm young. Those are some of my masis and masis behind me, and then some cousins. And this is like in the little house where I was mentioning running water was scarce. And you can juxtapose this photo right next to this photo. And you can kind of see me in the middle from India to the US, where I've got this USA shirt on. And then I'm surrounded by these boys who are all white identifying. And then it's just me. And I'm trying to like just figure out, how do I belong? How do I fit into this world? And how do I not lose, the history and the culture of my traditions, but then how do I like also honor that I want to fit in? So this was very confusing. It was a very confusing time in my life. And, it continued to be. And what's really fascinating is that as we go forwards, there was the gods and the goddesses, but then in my neighborhood, there was one person in my neighborhood who's one of my best friends, probably from sixth grade through senior year of high school, and he's Jewish, and his family was Jewish, and I'd often go to his house for Friday night Shabbat dinner. I learned so much from his parents about the Jewish faith, and he would come to my house often. He'd come to visit, he'd come to hang out, and he'd come to spend time with me at my house. And this was like my best friend. And one day he comes over and he walks into the kitchen, like at the top of our stairs, and he looks up and he sees this cloth that's hanging across our doorway. And he looks up at it kind of curiously, and then he looks back at me and he says, Hawah, should I not be here right now? I was a little confused. I didn't know exactly what he was talking about. I kind of look up and it didn't register for me. I still had not really learned enough. I was still in like sixth grade. It didn't really fully hit me or understand. But the symbol that he was looking at on top of our kitchen was right here. And many of you watching, and listening right now, you've seen this symbol perhaps in many forms. The form that we know it as is a form very different than perhaps how it's come to be known since World War II and the reign of Hitler and Nazis. But this is the traditional Indian swastika. And the swastika is a symbol of peace and prosperity. It's a symbol that has been around for thousands of years. And this symbol is one that you will find spread out across the planet and used in so many cultural traditions and legacies. Here's a symbol of a man in India praying to the swastika. But this goes really back. You'll find swastika history so far back that, and it was so a part of my culture. I'd see it everywhere in India and even in our home and even at the mandirs that it never registered to me that that's actually also the sign that the Nazis appropriated and stole and began to use to represent the fascism of Nazism and the horrendous crimes and genocide that they waged. So here you'll see on exhibit in the National Museum of the History of Ukraine, and this was in Ukraine in the 12th century. This is almost 900 years ago, and it's believed to belong to on a dress collar of a Slovakian princess, embroidered with gold crosses and swastikas to ward off evil. So swastikas traditionally have been used to ward off evil and as a symbol of peace and prosperity. Most of you know the Buddha, and this is a statue of the Buddha, and you'll see right in the center of his chest. I wish I could zoom in, but if you look closely, right in the center, right above his heart, is the swastika. I'm pretty sure the Buddha was not a Nazi, and I'm pretty sure that the Buddha very much was a part of calling for an end to suffering. And still, here you find the symbol. In Japan, a giant vase at a Buddhist temple in Japan, you see the swastika. In Mesopotamia, ancient pottery, if you look in the center of this, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, you'll see the swastika in the center of this pottery. And here, the ancient Greeks and the Romans were also fond of the swastika. And you'll see the swastika here used in this ancient print in drawing from the Greeks and the Romans. So you'll see the swastika appearing all around. Here, it's coins from Corinth in the 6th century BC. Now, this is almost 2,500 years ago, and you'll see the swastika appearing. A lot of the way that the swastika traveled from India across Ukraine, across that whole area, this was a symbol that had been used by many people, but mainly originally known to be associated with the Vedas and Vedic literature. Again, more swastikas and more cultures. Here you'll even notice on the far right, you'll notice an Indian blanket, a Native American blanket with the swastika symbol. This is a Chinese symbol. In China and Japan, the swastika was used very widely. And here in sub-Saharan Africa, you'll find it appearing at the entrance to doorways. You'll find it printed on cloths. So the swastika has a long, long ancient history. And even though in the Western world it's synonymous with fascism, it actually goes back thousands of years. And it's been used as a symbol of good fortune. And it was used by the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jains for millennia. And commonly it's known as an Indian sign, an Indian symbol. And when early Western travelers traveled to Asia, they were inspired by the symbol and brought it back to their respective homelands. And it became also a fad. So here, by the time we reach a little bit later, you'll see like this headdress from a Native American with the swastika on a Native American headdress. You'll see more within Native American pottery and prints. Here's a Hindu boy with a shaved head. This is a more recent image of the symbol. And here you'll see it on the back of a pack of playing cards in the United States of America. It's now at this point being used culturally in America, in the United States. So by the early 1900s, 1930s, 1940s, it's being used on playing cards. It's used by the American military during World War I. So before Hitler appropriated the Indian symbol, it was actually used and appropriated by American military units. And you'll see it here on the plane. And most of all these benign uses have halted, of course, since the Nazis rose to power. However, it's important to understand the history and where these things come from. So Coca-Cola used it as a pendant in some of their early marketing. The Boy Scouts of America adopted it. The Girl Scouts of America adopted it. They called their magazine Swastika, according to Stephen Heller. They would even send out swastika badges to their young readers. And this is, again, well before World War II. And you'll even find it here in California, where I'm zooming into you from today. This is in the 20th century, early 20th century, was a fad in California for fruit packaging. So the swastika represents something well before Hitler, but at the same time, the world loved it until Hitler stole it. And now today, this symbol right here represents so much pain and so much suffering. And Hitler actually called it the Hakenkreuz, which probably would be more appropriate to name it that because instead we've used our word swastika to now describe this symbol, which is actually not what swastika means. It's been appropriated, it's been stolen, and it's been misused. And now it's one of the greatest symbols of hate in our world. And it's really sad that that's happened to this symbol. Here, back to Ganesh being the remover of obstacles. Here's Ganesh with his hand in the air with the swastika right there in the center of his hand. You can see right there. So moving forwards, there's all of this important conversation to be had around appropriation and how things get repackaged, how things get resold. It becomes an important conversation for those that you're listening and that are listening in to this today, just to think about how quickly something can change. And when I think of yoga and I think of the West and how we've taken yoga and turned it into something that is now very far from hitting the intention and the mark of what the original practice was meant to be. Yoga today in the West and in the modern world, really, not just the West, it's become really something that's about materialism. And there's so much materialism and the money that's associated to the practice, and how so much of the practice is an industry, and it's about selling things. And really in the essence of the practice, we're not selling things, we're actually letting go of things, and we're not accumulating things, but we're trying to become more and more minimal. We're trying to live with less so that we can actually attain higher spiritual pursuits. And so in my childhood, back to this theme of the remover of obstacles, and when Ganesh is the obstacle, for me in my life, there was this like incredible arc where I was born in the US. I am as Western as you can be. If you drop me in New York City, I'm good to go. But then you could take me to India and I've got an accent and everybody knows I'm not Indian, but I'm still supposedly Indian. And here am I, a teacher and someone that's holding this lineage as an ancestral lineage with a responsibility to also teach and somehow bring the authentic knowledge of India and this work to the Western world. And that's really hard to do. And for me, part of how Ganesh became my obstacle was because I spent so many years feeling shame. And so, although Ganesh was the remover of obstacles, Ganesh was my obstacle. Ganesh was the barrier to me being able to fit in. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to belong. And Ganesh actually, the image of Ganesh was what my friends would see, and it would scare them and it would make me think that I came from a weird cultish family. And so Ganesh was my obstacle. And India was the source of so much of my healing and my childhood and my love. And I'd mentioned my story about being removed and really feeling so much shame around the language, that the obstacle finally brought me to the point where I got to college. And by the time I got to college, I started to understand how racism works. I started to learn about racism and institutional racism. And what I was starting to read in the textbooks began to make sense because I was seeing it in my own life and I was reflecting on the things that I had denied myself. And that was really, really hard to do. How to reflect on how racism impacted me, to the point where I finally realized by near the end of my years in college, I realized I had to go back to India and I had to reclaim all the things I'd lost. And so I began, over the next decade of my life, I began to travel back to India pretty much every year. I just became completely fascinated and almost indignant. I was so upset that I let racism steal India from my heart, that I would go back to India every year, pretty much from the year I turned like 21 till I was like 35. I would go back every year, at least for 2 months, sometimes a month. I moved there for a year and a half at one time. I spent time with my grandmother and my grandfather. This is my grandmother and my grandfather, my dadima, my dadaji. And, they would see me off with these garlands and we would do these prayers to Ganesh. And I didn't know why, but I just knew. I was like, I have to take this back. I have to remember where I came from. Here's more family in India. And these trips back and forth to India, they brought me so much vitality. They brought me so much love again in my heart. And I realized that we can overcome adversity when we can finally embrace and we can finally acknowledge and we can finally accept who we are. And accepting who we are and knowing that no one can take away our history, nobody can take away our past. And the power of story is that stories will sometimes be rewritten for us if we don't take the time to own our own stories. And so my talk today was really meant to give you all a perspective of what it's like to be somebody with South Asian roots that's been living in the US for his whole life, but who's watched the practice become diluted, who's felt his own life become diluted, who's had to move through the adversity to reclaim the practice. And that's exactly what's happening in my life. And I don't claim to be an expert in any of these stories. First of all, the story of Ganesh is is so long. And there's so many versions of the story of Ganesh and how he lost his head. And I'm giving you one version of many, and I recognize that. I understand that these are mythologies, and for some people they're mythology, and for some people they're real. And my mom and I talk about this a lot together. My dad as well. We talk about this, about how like some of us believe these stories really happen, and it's not actually belief. These are real things that happened in the historical timeline. And there's others of us that look at these as stories that we learn from. They're mythology. They're stories that we hear to create archetypes of what it means to embody wisdom and courage and compassion, and what does it mean to embody kindness and love. And so that's also what these stories represent. They represent all of that. It's like holding the polarities, and that is what yoga is. Yoga is holding the polarities. It's holding love, and it's holding hate, and then it's transcending all of it and transcending the duality. And so that is that's a little bit of what I wanted to share today. I would love to open it up to questions for the last few minutes that I have, but I wanted to just create a little arc of a narrative that would give you an opportunity to understand the Hindu gods and goddesses with some of my perspective, and then also a chance to see how racism can hold us back, but racism can also be fuel to propel us to great heights. And I've always found in life that when things get really bad, they tend to also get better. And I know it's a hard time we live in the world. I know it's a really hard time that we're all going through. But I want to maintain hope. Like every moment when we hit the lowest of the lows of humanity, there's this opportunity for growth. And it's that opportunity for growth that I hope we can lean into, and I hope we can all become better, and we can learn from these ancient teachings about nonviolence, about ahimsa, about asteya, non-stealing and non-greed, and how to be more selfish or selfless, in our work. So I'm going to end there for now, and I'm just going to open up for a few questions. Kaveri, back to you.
Thank you, Hawah. What a beautiful storytelling you did. Thank you for thank you for the beautiful, incredible pictures too, and sharing so much. There's a lot of love and appreciation in the chat for you, as well as two questions, which I will read to you and you can answer. The first one is from Christina Rose. A question about ahimsa is coming up for her. Shiva is the first teacher of yoga, but all this beheading certainly are acts of violence. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I love it. And I absolutely would say that this is probably the source of most of my philosophical debates with my family is around this. It's around the story of the Bhagavad Gita, and how ultimately there is, again, a resorting back to violence to solve a problem. And these are great long introspective alleys that we drop into. The beauty about the Upanishads and the Mahabharata and all these ancient texts and the Vedas is that the knowledge is meant to create inquiry, and curiosity is one of the most important fundamental parts of being a sadhak, to be somebody deeply embedded on the path of self-realization, spiritual growth. It is our responsibility to question the answers. Blind faith will not get us to where we need to go in our evolutionary trajectory. And it's our responsibility as students and lifelong learners to always question the answers we've been given and the stories we've been told. And I remember when I was a little kid growing up, I would get into some battles, like philosophical battles with family members around the Gita, and about why the Pandavas have to fight and use violence. I don't get it. This is about ahimsa, but now we're in another war. All these holy books are the same. They all end up in war. They all start with war. They end in war. Like, why can't we figure out another way? And so, and you're absolutely right. Shiva, The genesis of yoga begins with Shiva, Lord Shiva, and here you have him beheading this person in his rage. Um, so yeah, these are the questions that we need to be asking. Why these myths, and what are the news stories that we can keep writing, and how do we gain some deep understanding and perspective even from the Gita? I think as I've gotten older and perhaps having new perspective, I do see and understand the reason why and where um in the Gita finally at some point the Pandavas decided they had to fight. I can understand it now. I do think there's things that we have to stand up for. I do. And these questions though are ones that fall into your personal sphere. These are questions that you need to answer through inquiry, through reading, and through your own meditation to decide where they land for you and how they fit into your spiritual growth. Because I had to do my work, and I can't say that I have all the answers, but I can say that I constantly am asking the questions.
Beautifully stated. One last question from Jennifer Wallace. She wants to know, I would love to know how he responded to his Jewish friend when he saw the swastikas in your home.
That's a great question. I actually responded by confusion. I didn't know what he meant because I didn't know the Nazi symbol at that time. I didn't know that that was a Nazi symbol. I've only seen that symbol in like temples and mandirs and in my house as something we pray to. I didn't have any context. I think it was still like sixth grade. I don't know if we fully had gotten into the history of the Holocaust yet. I feel like that must have been later because this was my first, it was an aha moment for me. I was like, whoa, what's going on? Because then he explained it to me and I basically was like, what are you talking about? I don't get what you're saying. And he was like, dude, that's the Nazi symbol. Like, are you a Nazi? And I was like, we are not Nazis. But what's a Nazi again? And then he kind of explained more of like the history of the Holocaust and the genocide to me. And then I would go back to his house and spend time with his parents and have Shabbat dinner and eat food with his family. And went to his bar mitzvah and, so like continued to be my best friend through high school. And, you know, it just shows too that bridges can be built. Like, there could have been great, grave misunderstanding in that moment. And thankfully there wasn't. And, interestingly enough, we still have that in our home. That same piece of tapestry has been in our home since I was born, and it's still there today. And these are hard questions. Like, what do we do? Should every Indian take down the swastika from our house? I don't know. Like Kaveri, I don't know if you have it in your home or if you ever remember seeing it, but these are good questions.
Those
Yeah.
are great questions. Yeah, good self-studies questions. That's it for questions that were presented for you, Hawah. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Um, thank you.
I'm sorry, Kaveri, if I could just say one last thing.
For sure.
I for sure am not, I'm providing a historical arc to an ancient symbol. And, of course, I would hope that it goes without saying that, in all ways, in categorically, that I would oppose any use of that symbol as a symbol of hatred. I'm just trying to provide people with an understanding of its origins and how it was appropriated.
I think you did a fantastic job of that. There was a lot of relatability or understanding and thank yous in the chat. So thank you for
Yeah.
doing that. Thank you for sharing such relatable stories. They were beautiful. They were beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening, for the opening sessions of the Amplified series. On Ganesh is the obstacle, how adversity can propel your life forward with Hawah. Special thanks to you again, Hawah, and the donors for supporting this third year of our Amplified Voices of the Global Majority series. And thanks again to all of you for your presence with us online. Your support is vital to our Amplify series. Together, we uplift voices of the global majority dedicated to dismantling injustice and nurturing our planet. Your donations power this transformative work. You could head to a link that we will put in the chat to learn more about supporting Kripalu's efforts in this work. We look forward to being with you again tomorrow. We'll return at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard for Befriending Yourself and Dismantling Perfectionism with Tejal Patel. Until then, be well and amplify. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, Hawah. Thank you.
Bye.
Ah